Hello, everyone. Yep, good morning to both of you. This is a Jedi coffee cup. Today it's coffee, not water today. Or Kool-Aid, like it was on Wednesday. How's everyone doing? It's the last day of our first week of doing everything online. Hi, everyone. Anyone just wake up? Yes, thank you, Dominic. I appreciate it. It says, can you read it? Let's see. Jedi, can't put it over my keyboard. Jedi Knight. Been awake since 8. Leon just woke up. Okay. To each their own. To each their own. This is a totally different way of doing school. It's really crazy. So I started preparing for this lecture yesterday a little bit, and it was weird because I started to realize that, oh, well, tomorrow I have to talk about this for 45 minutes or an hour. So, oh God, been up since 6. No thanks, John. No, thank you. But yeah, it's totally different. At least in the classroom, we have like more kind of back and forth, and we can touch more on the finer points that way. I feel like this way it's a little bit more important that I come with things to talk about. So anyway, hi Karina. It's anyway, there's good preparation, good ways of teaching both ways, and I prepare both ways, trying to do a good job. So it's just interesting to think about. I'm curious about y'all's end though. Do you prepare for class differently now that we're doing stuff online? I'll wait a second and get some responses. Are you doing things different now to interact in class than you used to? Or are you not preparing at all? Procrastinating? Yeah, I feel that. What else? Group me. Yeah. Yeah. One of the I got some emails about the reflection. So I posted the syllabus and I reposted it yesterday. I don't know if it took the first time, but your second reflection is not actually due until April 10th, or no, it's due April 12th at 11:59 p.m. So that's not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. And it's similar to the ones before. It lists the lectures that we've heard, and it asks you to pick the thing that you thought was most interesting and kind of reflect on it. I also encourage you to think about including in there, how the class is going for you differently now that we're online, or some things that's going on in your life that maybe you'd like to talk about or share. Obviously, we also have office hours, and you can request to meet up with me that way. I had a Skype call the other day, so that was good. It's different than regular office hours, but it was fun. Hold on, lots of responses. Okay, you can interact more because I can't see you. Yes, there's a lot of research out there about that, how people feel more likely to get engaged online because of the anonymity. So yeah. Yeah, emailing your professors a lot more. I have more email now than like at any point in my life. So if you email me and it takes me a long time to get back to you, my email is something like completely out of control, despite my best attempts to keep up with it. Am I going to do credit? No credit. Okay, that's complicated. As a department, we are talking about it. There haven't been any final decisions, but it's looking like that could be an option, and that if it becomes an option, it will be on an individual basis. So you can request, well, if it passes, that you will be able to request if you want to take it as a credit, no credit class, or if you want to take it as an ABCD kind of thing, because obviously credit, no credit doesn't hurt your GPA, but doesn't help your GPA either. So just something to think about. Okay. So those are the main things I wanted to talk about. I got some kind of questions about that. When I get off the live stream, I'll go double check the Blackboard. I changed the due date. For whatever reason, it's still emailing all the wrong thing. So let me go see if I can figure out why it's doing that. Okay. So the person we're going to talk about today is Max Weber. And in case you couldn't tell by my little clever thumbnail, he has a German name, and the pronunciation, like I said already, is Weber, like Vayburr, even though it looks like Weber. It's how we would pronounce it nowadays. Okay, so a couple really, really interesting things about Weber. So you remember the very first person that we talked about was Karl Marx, and the second person we talked about was Emil Durkheim. And Max Weber's full name is Maximilian Karl Emil Weber. So he literally has all of their names in one name. I mean, what are the odds of that? So Durkheim, Marx, and Weber, they're considered the three founding fathers of sociology. They were all writing at approximately the same time. Marx would have died when Weber and Durkheim were in their 20s, late 20s. But so Marx was kind of the first one, but sociology really hadn't taken off yet. So Marx kind of gets lumped in as a sociologist after the fact, and Durkheim was actively working to create sociology, and Weber was working very hard to create social science. So he comes from a really, really interesting background. His dad was his family was very well off. And his mom was came from a family of French Huguenots. So that's a particular type of Puritan Protestant religion that has a very serious, like, moral absolutist beliefs. Everything is kind of black and white. And then his dad was a politician and highly educated, very interested in ideas. And so their home was actually full of the intelligentsia and the kind of political people of the time. So he really grew up in a very intellectually stirring atmosphere. And you can really see this when he was 13 for Christmas. His gift to his parents was that he wrote 2 essays. Okay, imagine getting a Christmas gift of 2 essays. And let me double check. I think I wrote down what they're about. No, it's not here. Okay. Off the top of my head, I remember one of them. So he wrote, one of the papers was about agriculture in Roman society and how, like, agriculture had changed over the course of the Roman Empire. So this was a guy who was very bookish, very interested in studying, and he was a terrible, terrible student. His teachers all thought he was dumb, and he thought his teachers were dumb, so he didn't pay attention. And unbeknownst to his teachers, while they were getting mad at him and he thought they were ignoring, and they thought he was ignoring them, he read all 40 volumes of Goethe. It looks like Goethe, Goethe. And Goethe is the one who wrote the play Faust, and that's actually where Karl Marx's dad got that whole idea about, like, if Marx's heart was ruled by a demon, a Faustian demon or an angelic demon. So it's really interesting how all of this fits together, these different references. And, I love the history of this. And these were real people. They had real lives, and they were very, very interesting. Okay. This guy's life was totally crazy. Like, the way they made Hamilton into an awesome musical, because his life was so wild. I feel like Max Weber's life could be like a Hamilton kind of thing. By the way, I'll just pause here for a second. Does anyone else here like love Hamilton as much as me? Like, I'm like a huge Hamilton fan. Like, last year for my birthday, my wife got me tickets to go see it here in San Antonio, which it was so bomb. I can't even tell you. Yeah, I'm just like super big into Hamilton. Am I crazy? Do other people in here like Hamilton? And if so, do you have a favorite Hamilton song? Yes. All right, what's your favorite song? Lay it on me. Oh, Kaylee, don't tell us that. I'm so on Broadway. God, so jealous. Okay, so I'm gonna pause. I'm not gonna tell you my favorite Alexander Hamilton, obviously. Brittany, I disagree. I mean, I love it. It's a great song. Yes, I agree with Christelle. It's very hard to pick a favorite song. Like there are just so many good ones, and I think my feeling on which one is so good kind of changes. Um, we go through different seasons in life, and sometimes things are really good, sometimes they're kind of bad, sometimes they're rough and confusing, and so I feel like my favorite song kind of changes. I'd say consistently though, it's tough. This is a divisive issue here, real divisive. I would say maybe Wait for It. I know the story of tonight is legit, yes, but I think Wait for It. Like it's a song for all seasons. It's so catchy, and of course Leslie Odom was just like an awesome singer. Burn. Mm. Burn is just so dark. Like, I mean, but I get it. Like, she's really mad, and what he did was really terrible. So, like, I get that. Yeah, Satisfied is incredible. It's really funny. Like, so I didn't even know anything about it, and someone kind of mentioned to me, a student in passing, and so I pulled it up on um, on Apple Music, and I just like put the album, like, song one, and just said go. And I was really kind of struck how like the entire musical is on Apple Music, so you can really like just listen to the whole thing. It's like you're there. You can't see anything, but for that you can hop on YouTube, and there are actually some really amazing artists who created like animations, for example, of the different scenes. And one of them, I forget what their name is, but one of them did such a good job. It's like just extremely clever and extremely well done. So anyway, for what it's worth, I know right now everyone's at home. Um, uh, yes, yeah, Wait for It, exactly. I mean, I think you got to say, in terms of just like the unbelievable singing, Wait for It has the best singing in the whole thing. But Alexander Hamilton is probably the most fun song in the whole album, so I'll give you that. I also love Right Hand Man. Like, I think Right Hand Man is legit. And let's see, every now and then, like, we'll do karaoke, and I always have to bust out some Hamilton at karaoke because I'm a nerd like that. Sometimes in class I show what is the one about the duel. Can't think of what it's called. Unbelievable. But anyway, sometimes I show people the animated video of the duel. That way, if any of y'all are ever in a situation where you need to know, who wants to be a millionaire kind of situation, or you ever want to impress anyone with your, useless knowledge, you can know how people used to duel. Okay. So sorry, tangent there, but man, I'm super big into Hamilton. So, but we got on this track because I was saying Weber's life was so interesting. 10 Dual Commandments. Thank you, Christelle. Jeez, I can't believe I forgot that. Okay, Weber's life was super, super interesting. So he's born in 1864, and he dies in 1920. And like I said, he grew up in a really well-off family, and very, very well connected. And you can just imagine like the difference between having this very worldly, very very politically involved, very intellectually involved father, and this very like moralistic, black and white thinking mother who's like, very very loving, but also very like, this is the right way to do things. And the dad who's more like, well, it's like everything's kind of a toss up, and politics is sort of a game. And so growing up, Weber really used to side with his dad in all of these arguments. But eventually he goes to college, and he becomes a military officer, and describes his 1 year of military service as drinking lots of beer and fencing, which I just think is hysterical. And then he transfers, and after he transfers, he's studying law. And as he continues to study law and get interested in politics, he increasingly starts taking his mom's side in these family debates. And he's living at home, which was common at the time period. So eventually, Weber and his dad, they have this like massive fight. Okay, so like things have been going bad between them. They get in this huge fight, and then the fight's unresolved. Right, Max storms off, and then the dad dies. What? And it's never resolved. I mean, So for the rest of his life, I mean, from this event, Weber is increasingly prone to depression, to anxiety, to insomnia. He actually like kept a really detailed diary of his different like mental afflictions and how they were presenting and what was like going on in his life. And eventually, his wife burned that book because she was worried that his work would fall out of favor if the Nazis found out that he had suffered from mental illness. Because obviously the Nazis not only persecuted Jews, but they persecuted a lot of other groups, including people with mental and physical handicaps, deficiencies, whatever you want to call it. So okay, so Weber has this crazy life event. His dad dies. It's never resolved. Okay, it like changes him as a person. He starts to his suffering becomes chronic, and he's increasingly less happy. At the same time, he marries Marianne, and Marianne is like his distant cousin. Okay, they never have sex ever. Okay, and eventually, Weber has sex with a prostitute, and then shortly after he has sex with a prostitute, he gets Spanish flu, develops pneumonia, and he dies. Okay, so what a crazy, like just really crazy life. Along the way, he tries to get involved in politics, and he can't ever get elected, which leads him to make these like really kind of hysterical observations that the skills you need to get elected are not the same skills that you need to be a good politician, to be a fair politician. He writes an unbelievable critique of political economy and bureaucracy. Talks about what he calls the iron cage, how there are like certain positions in a bureaucracy, and the prestige is with that position. And the person who assumes that post is able to pick up all of that prestige, and how that creates all sorts of problems. But at the same time, it's really hard to get away from bureaucracy because it's just so efficient. It rationalizes and systematizes the relations between different levels of people. It also allows for upward mobility. So it's just a really, really astute guy. And he's working on a book on the sociology of religion that was published after he died. It's comparative, actually, which is very rare for the time period, kind of looking at different religions on their own terms and using like not really interpretive, but observational lens to talk about what he was observing in terms of practices and in terms of beliefs and in terms of teachings and stuff like that. So all really interesting stuff. And then the book he's most famous for, though, is called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And it's something of a controversial book because for the most part, people still agree with its thesis, but there's also been people who said he's totally wrong. And his basic argument was this: the countries that were predominantly Protestant led or developed much faster in terms of their economy. They became not only wealthy faster, but became wealthier in general. And he was able to, or his way of explaining this, interpreting this, was because he said the Protestants had two doctrines that were different than the teachings in the Catholic countries, and they were the doctrine of the calling, right, which is from Martin Luther, and since Luther was originally a Catholic monk, you could argue that the calling is also a concept in Catholic theology. But basically, the idea is that everybody is called to do something, and so whatever it is that you're called to do, you're called to be excellent at it. And so in that way, it kind of mirrors the Aristotelian Platonic notion of virtue that we talked about before, but also pushing this idea of duty to become the best. Okay, and then the other idea that was wedded with this was the doctrine of predestination, which was created by John Calvin, who is the father of the Calvinist denomination. And his argument was that whoever is that we are all predestined either to heaven or hell, and that no matter what we do, we can't change that. And you cannot do anything in your life that makes you more or less worthy, because we're all horrible, horrible, horrible people, and therefore we all deserve to be damned. And so the only people who get to go are the people who are given grace, but we can't ever earn it. We just get it. Okay. And so this idea of being predestined to heaven and this idea of being called to being excellent at things combined to create a culture that really, really values hard work, that kind of bashes people for being lazy, that bashes people for making excuses, that basically demands that you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and that you are always working, you're always saving, and you are not spending money on luxuries. So he would say, like, you start a business, and then when your business started to do well, you would take the money that you were making and you would reinvest it into your business, and so that would make your business more successful. And the more money you made, the more you would invest in your business, and you wouldn't spend it on worldly pleasures, because that was wasteful in this Protestant ethic that Weber calls it. And so, since they weren't spending money on wasteful things, they were only putting it into the business. That made the business more productive and helped it grow faster and faster. Well, how does this work with the theology stuff? One of the things that kind of was teased out by the Calvinist theologians wasn't really Calvin himself so much as the people after him. But they were basically saying, well, how can we know if we're saved? And Calvin was a real stickler on this. He said, you can't know. It's just, you can't. But he kind of nodded in a direction. So maybe there's a particular way. And so the people after him came up with this idea that you could know that you're saved if you are successful here. And so, of course, everyone wanted to be successful because if you were successful on earth, in earthly endeavors like business, it was a sign that you were saved. So basically, people started to engage in behaviors that made them very successful. And when they did that, then that helped them feel better about being saved, and that led them to reciprocate that behavior and continue down that path. So it's a really interesting argument. Like I said, it's the question is far from settled. People still disagree about it. Every couple of years, there's someone who retests the assumptions. They try to do it quantitatively versus qualitatively. It's a really interesting argument. So I thought about assigning you that, but then I thought to myself, no, I can talk about that in 5 or 10 minutes, and instead I'd rather assign another part of Weber's text, and he is, how can I put this politely? He is not a great writer. He's always striving to be very, very clear, but he writes in these like super long sentences, and he has these weird ways of like offsetting phrases and kind of subject verb agreement and weird uses of like I said, weird uses of grammar. So so it's not uncommon when you're reading his stuff that he'll have like an entire paragraph where it's like 1 or 2 sentences, but it's a massive paragraph. So if you struggled reading Weber, you're not alone. He's definitely tough. But just like with Durkheim, I'm actually going to start with the end of the text, because I think the end of the text is really what I wanted y'all to understand. And I want to talk more about that, take a couple questions, and then I'll go back to the beginning, hit on a couple more points, and we'll be done. Okay? So before I go to the text, does anyone have any questions about the class, about anything that I said? Do y'all agree that his life would make a good play? I should say some other things, I guess. So, like I said, he was involved in politics. He could never get elected. He tried to form his own political party that kind of combined the Social Democrats and the liberals, and it didn't work because they didn't trust each other. The Social Democrats were too revolutionary, and the liberals were too kind of set in their ways. He had kind of an interesting relationship with the Weimar Republic. He talked about in the beginning supporting the Germans during World War I, not World War II, World War I. But eventually he came to see it as a problematic war. But he also didn't like that people were blaming the Germans for starting the war. So Weber and another guy we'll talk about later, Georg Simmel, they both had kind of interesting relationships with other intellectuals in Europe and around the world. And they were engaged in some really kind of crazy stuff, and got in trouble and took some pretty impressive and nuanced positions, especially for the time period that they were in. So Weber will come up again, by the way, when we talk about Du Bois. So be ready for that. So no one's saying anything in the live chat. Okay. So I will periodically glance over here, but I'm going to go to the text if that's okay with y'all. So the text that the text that I assigned you comes from his book Economy and Society, and it's about the types of legitimate domination. And so before I go to the end, I want to talk about his definition of domination. So he says that domination was defined above as the probability that certain specific commands or all commands will be obeyed by a given group of persons. It thus does not include every mode of exercising power or influence over other persons. Domination, and then in parentheses, he says authority, in this sense, may be based on the most diverse motives of compliance, all the way from simple habituation to the most purely rational calculation of advantage. So, the word domination I think, is a very scary word, and kind of gives us a bad feeling in the pit of our stomach. So I think it's actually a little bit more useful to talk about how he uses authority as a synonym. And so authority is the ability to basically enact your will, that if you give a command, that other people will follow it. So he's talking about how can you have a legitimate authority, legitimate domination. And so you can't really have domination or authority if you don't have legitimacy, is going to be the big argument here. Okay, so real quick before I go on, let me make sure that everyone is good. Will there be a follow-up video on the Nation States Project? I can make one. What do you want to know? Some people have already finished it. People who have finished, by the way, I've been really impressed with your projects, and especially a sense of humility that people have showed in terms of, they thought that they would be really good at running a country, or thought that they really understood how certain things worked, and they were surprised that they really tanked the economy, for example, or civil rights or something like that. So it's been really interesting, and I think it's a really good subject, a really good project, and it really shows can really be a great eye-opening experience for people. So what would you like to know about the Nation States Project in a follow-up video? I'll sit here for a second. I got the Hamilton playing in my head. Way to go, guys. It's 10 dual commandments. Okay, I'm done. Are we going to hear about what y'all want to see in Nation States Project? Okay. While y'all think about that, I am going to go back to my text, if that's okay. All right. So he lists all of these different examples when he's talking about domination and legitimacy. But like I said, the most important thing here is at the end of the reading. It's only 3 pages, but they're admittedly dense. So you probably have to read it a couple of times, and I would encourage you to, because I think what he has to say here is very interesting. So he says there are 3 pure types of authority. And so he says there are 3 pure types of legitimate domination. Remember, he's using authority and domination as kind of synonyms for one another. The validity of the claims to legitimacy may be based on 1, this is the first type, rational grounds, that those are resting on a belief in the legality of enacted rules and the right of those elevated to authority under such rules to issue commands. So, what does that mean? The legal, it's called rational legal authority in most books, basically says that there are certain people who have legitimate power when certain laws are in place and when certain political systems are in place. So, for example, we're in the United States right now. So Trump is president, and because we have a constitution, because we have a division of labor in terms of the political powers, a separation of powers between the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislative branch, all of those branches have different legitimate powers. Okay. And this is why when the Supreme Court overthrows or changes or enacts laws that press down on things that the states want to do or push down on things that people have been doing in the past, it's such a big deal because is the where is the rightful authority, right? Where is the legitimate authority? And this is a really interesting thing too. So like once you get a law passed that you like, then when you have to defend that law, a lot of times, you would think that the people who are always on the side of state rights would be a consistent group or a consistent political party, but it's not that way at all. When you have something that's passed and you really want to hold on to that, and you're worried that the federal government might overrule it, for example, um, that's when suddenly you see people defend states' rights. So take something like real controversial, Roe versus Wade. Oh, and John, yes, you are able to submit the project already. So Roe versus Wade, right? Legal abortion. So that's it's a federal law. The states can't overturn it. Okay. So let's say that someone wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade, and they started to mobilize enough people, and they had the momentum, and it looked like they could actually happen. Then the people who were pro-choice, the people who were you don't want to say pro-abortion, but basically pro-legal abortion, but pro-safer abortion or whatever, then suddenly they would fight for states' rights because they would say the federal government doesn't have the authority to overthrow that law. Okay, so Weber was way ahead of his time in observing how this works. So that's the first type of authority, is rational legal authority, and it's based on this idea that the people who have power in a particular situation, in this case, political power, that they got that legitimately, and it's because of their place in the political hierarchy that they have that power. Okay, so that's the first one. Second one, traditional grounds, which is resting on an established belief in the sanctity of immemorial traditions and the legitimacy of those exercising authority under them. He calls this traditional authority. So traditional authority, I think that's probably the hardest one for us in 2020 to really understand, because so much changes. I mean, I think in the last video, probably the last two videos, I've made jokes about how the language that y'all use, y'all's cool lingo, changes every single semester. So I'm always having to ask the same questions, and I want to say the same kinds of things, but I have to learn to say them in different ways. That way y'all can understand me and relate to me and think that it's, silly or fun or goofy or whatever the case is. So when something like the language changes all the time, and the expectations of people change all the time, and what we think of as being cool changes all the time, it's hard to understand how anyone could see tradition as having a lot of authority. But for most of human history, tradition has been one of the biggest sources of authority. It's, why does someone have authority? Because they always have that authority. Why do we do it that way? Because we've always done it that way. One example, I'm thinking of Moana, the Disney movie. Remember how, like, originally her tribe, her ancestors, basically, they were sailors, they were explorers, and now they hide the boats, and they've become self-sufficient on land. And so in order to make that political arrangement work, they have this argument about traditional authority, and they say, well, this is how it's always been. Of course, it hasn't always been that way, but that's how that argument kind of goes. Let me think. Other examples. When you want to combine traditional authority with the rational legal, you might end up with the divine right of kings, right? The argument that the reason a particular person is a monarch, and a legitimate monarch at that, is because God ordained them to be the monarch of a particular place. And that's where they get their authority from, not simply from the people, which is the argument when it comes to modern politics, that the government gets its legitimacy from the consent of the people, but rather that the monarch gets their legitimacy from God. Okay, so that's super, super different, and tradition is extremely powerful. It's something that people can feel connected to. Obviously, we all grow up in a situation where we inherit the norms of in particular, like our families and our friends, or if we spend a lot of time with our friends' family, maybe their friends. their norms as well. And so it's interesting, and we can really see it like kind of butt heads. If you get into a serious long-term relationship, it doesn't mean that you can't see it in the short term. But if you have a serious friend, like someone who's like a really, really good friend, you spend a lot of time with them, or you're dating someone, it's very serious. And so, they interact with your family and you interact with theirs. You have these kind of aha moments where you realize that, families see things differently. So let me think. The best example of that in my life is probably um, just the humongous difference in emphasis when it comes to Christmas. Okay, so for my wife's family, what they like to do is they have this Christmas Eve gift thing that they do, where like at midnight on Christmas Eve, which is like 12 o'clock a.m. on December 24th, you scream Christmas Eve gift. And the person who says it the most to the most people without getting caught is that person's supposed to get an extra gift. And then but it becomes like it's really like competitive and interesting. So people have developed all sorts of clever schemes, hiding so that people can't say it to them, using speakers in other rooms to tell people, pretending to be asleep and then suddenly waking up. It's pretty intense. And then so then in her family, people exchange gifts between each other, like between family members on Christmas Eve. And then Christmas Day, there is like a little something from Santa. Okay. And then in my family on Christmas Eve, it was always like, we would go to um, like my grandma's house, and we would have dinner over there with like my dad's side of the family. And then we come back home, and then my parents might give us PJs or something like that, because it was cold and we got PJs once a year. And then Christmas Day, we would exchange gifts, between each other and with Santa or whatever. So that doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it was definitely different when I started going over there and I had to learn about Christmas Eve gift. And the first time that my wife got a pair of pajamas from my parents, I was like looking at her, thinking to myself, what does she think about coming over on Christmas Eve and receiving a pair of pajamas? So anyway, when you talk about tradition, right, things that have been like passed on for a really, really long time, one of the things that we can think of is our family traditions. Never mind cultural traditions and the ways that people get together as different cultural groups and the way that they bond together. Since I mentioned the Protestant Catholic thing earlier, there was a change after Vatican II where the Catholic Mass went from being said in Latin to being said in the language of the particular place that it was in, for the most part, right? But of course, we also have like English and Spanish masses, or Spanish and French masses, or whatever the case is. So, right, you had a population of people who spoke a particular language. There was a mass in that language. That's the gist of it. Okay. And for some people, this was really good because it allowed people to understand what was being said. And for other people, this was an atrocity because we've always, right, quote, we've always done it this way. Why would we change it? And one of the interesting points is, well, if it's in Latin everywhere, then you could be traveling some other place in the world, and if you were to have gone to mass, it would have been exactly the same mass because it would have been in Latin. Whereas now, if you go and travel somewhere else and you go to mass and you're not familiar with the language of that country, right, you might be like, well, I know it's happening, but I don't know what's being said. So that's interesting. I had never thought about that before. But one of my friends, he's really Catholic. His mom is really Catholic, and was telling me about that. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. I never thought about that before. So tradition and the way we become tied to the way things have been, and the way we become tied to the norms in our family, the way we become tied to the norms in our culture, and the way things have, quote, always been, and the kind of the friction that comes when you interact with, or when especially when you get serious with someone, and maybe you want to get married to someone who has very different ideas about the same kinds of things. That there's a lot of fun there, and it's very interesting and an opportunity to really get close. But sometimes it can be really, really shocking. So, Okay, there's that. Now there's one other type of authority. Let me see. All right, charismatic authority, which is resting on devotion to the exceptional sanctity, heroism, or exemplary character of an individual person, and of the normative patterns or order revealed or ordained by them. Okay, so the example that Weber gives, and that people think of most generally, is like religious leaders, like people who have particular charisma and are especially charismatic. They bring people to them, they draw them in with their ideas, and because they're so moral and they're so good, and they help people see a better way of doing things, that grants them a certain type of authority. So you might think of someone like Jesus would have had charismatic authority. Buddha, Martin Luther King would have had charismatic authority. Um, yeah, so it's that sense of like intense goodness, and that is what draws people in, and gives those leaders a particular type of authority. What's interesting is, how do people maintain that idea of legitimacy, that the ideas are legitimate, in the absence of the charismatic authority? Suddenly you have to defend it without the same charisma. And that that's complicated, and in fact that's something that Weber worked on. So if you're interested in this, if you think this is cool, we can talk more about it, or I could give you some additional readings or point you into some secondary literature, and you can talk about that. Okay, hold on, more questions. The problem with "we have always done things this way" is, why would we change mentality as if you're doing da, 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 da. Yeah, that's absolutely true, John. So you can make the argument that this is the way that we've always done things, and then there's certainly an argument to be made that even if you've always done things a particular way, doesn't mean that it's the right way, and that's absolutely true. Obviously, there are really good reasons to change things that have always been a certain way. I'm not saying that there's not, but what I am saying is, and I think that Weber would point to this as well, is that people become really tied to the ideas, and really attached to the ideas that they grow up around. And I know from our class, for example, that a lot of times people leave my class and they have a really hard time with some of the things that I talk about, because I tend to somewhat consciously and somewhat unconsciously to tip over some of the things that people have really believed about themselves, and really hold on to. So let me just give you one that's kind of scary but not particularly heinous, and that is this idea that my life is not particularly special, or not particularly worthy, or that I'm not a particularly good or special person. And I talked about this in the Durkheim video about the division of labor, and how the division of labor makes every single person important, gives them a sense of dignity, gives them a sense of connection. And so yeah, I mean, maybe for a lot of human history, maybe from like almost your entire life, you've believed that you're not good enough or you're not worth anything. But I think, to your point, John, certainly continuing to hold that belief is not helpful. And I also think it's not true. And so having that idea challenged, so that you can come to a better understanding and a fuller appreciation of what it is to live a life, is really, really good. But I'm under no illusion that students don't find this idea troubling. It's hard to accept, wow, I really have not valued myself. And as such, I really haven't valued other people much either. Or perhaps I've overvalued other people and completely undervalued myself. Or, right, I've completely overvalued myself and completely undervalued other people. So a lot of variation there, obviously. And I think the argument for keeping things the way that they are is not a great argument, but it is a hallmark of society, and it's a hallmark of social interactions. Just think about like your friends, your friend group. Whenever y'all see each other, do y'all always do different things? And if you always do different things, are you capable of having a day where you just like stay in and do nothing? because that's really interesting, right? This idea of always having to have a novel situation, always having to do something new and exciting. I mean, I think that's a good thing, but at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on the relationship, and it puts a lot of pressure on that interaction to always be kind of unique and novel. Um, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's also not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to kind of keep in mind. So, yeah, but just think about your friends. Like, if y'all have been if you have some friends, especially friends that you've been friends with for a really really long time, and then you go off to college. Ooh, this is a good one. You go off to college, and or you go and you get a job, and you join the military or whatever, and you come back, and like you're different because you've had different experiences, and suddenly you start to interact with this person who you've known forever, and you just don't find them that interesting anymore, and you don't like them that much, or maybe they don't like you that much anymore, and you have to kind of ask yourself, what happened? I mean, we used to be so close, and suddenly, like, we can't get along, or we really don't have anything to talk about, or really don't see eye to eye on anything. And I really don't see any reason to continue this relationship, this friendship. That's jarring, and this happens all the time. And I think for the example I always bring up is students, like when they go back on holiday break during the winter, and that one semester of having usually been away from home, or having lived in a dorm, or having lived somewhere else, or whatever the case is, or working maybe for the first time, and you become different, and then you go back home, and people are trying to like boss you around and treat you like how you used to be, or based on the person that you used to be. You don't like it. You don't like it one bit. And there are good reasons for that, wouldn't you say? Because you've changed. Okay, so to recap some of these things that I've said, Weber argues that there are three legitimate types of authority: right? Rational, legal, charismatic, and then also the traditional authority. And while he would probably make the argument that I know he would make the argument that those are three different types of authority, most of the time, when we encounter them in reality, we don't encounter them separately. We encounter them in kind of an interpenetrating form. Okay, so that someone could be both a traditional authority, and they can also be a charismatic authority, or they can be a charismatic authority and a rational legal authority, or whatever the case might be, or they could be all three. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone in particular who would fit that. Yeah, I mean, okay, I guess you can make the argument that Martin Luther King fits all that. He was certainly charismatic, and the hardest part is the rational legal thing. His nonviolence obviously was something, but he the civil disobedience is what kind of complicates it. But I guess civil disobedience is a particular way to get people to pay attention, and bring attention to the issue that you're talking about. So yeah, I think Martin Luther King's probably the perfect example. So he was certainly charismatic. In terms of traditional authority, he drew extremely heavily on Christian theology and philosophy. And in fact, he went to Boston University, where he was trained in personalist philosophy. If you don't know anything about that, that's a super interesting rabbit hole for you to dive down. Personalism, personalist, super, super interesting stuff out there. And I've actually done some reading about it, and apparently we a lot of times we hear how MLK was really indebted to Gandhi, but he was really more indebted to the personalist than to anyone else, because that's how he gets the argument that people should be judged based on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, right? Because the content of your character is a very personal thing. It's who you are. So MLK did a really good job of integrating all these different types of authority, and he called for social change and completely different treatment of the way, and eradicating the Jim Crow laws and also their horrible stuff that was going on. And he challenged the conscience of the nation, and of course he won, and thank God for that. And yeah, so that's an example of someone who implements all three different kinds of authority and how they can kind of be interpenetrating. So yeah, I think that's the gist of that. Let me check my notes. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Okay. Oh, yeah, one other thing. So, when he's talking about domination, he's talking about authority. He says the precursor to talk about authority is you have to be willing to kind of admit at the very beginning, one of the assumptions is that obedience offers some particular kind of benefit. So, even our class, right? I'll put myself on the spot here. So, I have two rules, right? Be respectful, no BS. And I think the be respectful part is not very hard for any of you. I think the no BS part is hard because we talk about a lot of really like difficult stuff and we have challenging conversations and I push y'all and y'all push back. And so I think, that's obviously a good thing. I don't necessarily think it's an easy thing. But why do you buy into the rules? Because you get something out of it, right? You get a particular type of freedom because I'm going to make other people respect you. And I get a particular type of freedom because I know you're going to respect me and I'm going to respect you back. And we benefit, all of us, from following those rules. The rules have a particular kind of authority over y'all, and they also have a particular kind of authority over me. Now that's complicated, right? Because as the teacher, I can enforce the rules on you and not enforce them on myself. But I think that's disingenuous, and so I really try as hard as I can to make sure that I follow those rules as well, and to see them as a standard that kind of where it keeps me in check and keeps y'all in check. That way we can all be on as close a level playing field as we can to talk about these things that we're interested in. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is he said that there are kind of 4 different ways that people can be bonded to their superiors, right? Or can be bonded to authority. And the first one is custom. Again, we hit this idea of tradition. So who is a customary authority for you? And, where does that come from and how we're socialized into that, grow up in that. We think of that as normal. And, maybe eventually we rebel against it or whatever. But for the most part, custom is very powerful. Affectual ties, our sense of connection to one another, our sense of connection to other people, and how the sense of connection that we have to people makes us feel obligated. It gives us a sense of duty to do certain things and also to not do other things. So I make lots of jokes about being in my class and what that's like for y'all and stuff like that. But I think one of the things that really makes our class special is, y'all get invested into it. Y'all care about it. And so the effectual ties, that's a real thing. Material interest, right? Someone offers you, money or whatever, and and that kind of bonds you to them because, you want that money or whatever that material thing is. And the other common form is what he calls ideal, but he really means like when you have shared values or when someone has a particular value that you admire, that kind of helps you bond to them. So maybe you're someone who's really into talking about politics or whatever, and you bond with another teacher who really, really loves talking about politics also, and y'all, spar back and forth, even if y'all have different political beliefs, because y'all both share that particular value. Maybe you really love to cook and to have people over for dinner or whatever, and so you value other people who love to cook and love to host people. Does that make sense? So those are the 4 basic types of bonding, right? Custom, effectual ties, material interest, and then the idealism or values. Okay. I think that's about all I wanted to say about Weber. Like I said, his life was really, really interesting. He was embroiled in some crazy stuff. He took a lot of he really did a lot of impressive work that we still use today. That has become he becomes popular again every couple of years. In fact, probably the most popular social theorist out there right now is George Ritzer, who created this term McDonaldization, and it's all based on Weber's work on bureaucracy and on authority. So, yeah, I think that's about it that I wanted to say. It's been a long video, and I know I kind of went on a couple different tangents there, but I really wanted to drive home the idea is this sense of authority that comes from tradition, sense of authority that comes from connection to the past, from this idea that we've always done things a particular way. I mean, look at us right now. I mean, you know, we've always been in the classroom, and now here we are having to do this online, and it's like, can we do the same things online that we did in the classroom? And we're trying. Right? We're trying with the chat. We're trying with the digital office hours. Um, we're doing what we can. If y'all, by the way, have suggestions on how to make things better, I'd be happy to hear. And I encourage you to watch the video, watch it a second time, maybe share it with like your friends or something who are interested in these things or who are taking different classes, and be a reason to have a conversation with them. And then last thing. Oh, your like I said, reflection 2 is due not this Sunday but the following Sunday. And it's the same kind of thing as we've done before, where you just talk about the thing that you enjoy the most and what you enjoyed about it, and how can you implement it in your life. But I'd also encourage you to devote some time to talking about how things have been going for you, and maybe how a particular idea or theory or class really hit something for you and made you aware of something that perhaps you weren't aware of before. Because we often hit on similar ideas in this class, but we come at them from a lot of different angles. And that's something that I really pride myself on as a teacher. I don't want to be monolithic in any way, and I want to present a plurality of ideas and opinions and views, and I want to be open, and I want y'all to do the same thing. So I think that's all for me. Any questions about anything? 1 cup of coffee for the whole class. That's pretty good for me. All right. Nothing yet. I think we're probably good. All right. Well, I appreciate y'all tuning in. As always, we're going to continue this Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and noon thing for the foreseeable future. If you haven't done the reading yet, I encourage you to go back and read it. We're really trying to how is Biscuit? Biscuit's good. He's not in here. He's in the other room. He learned a new trick yesterday. It's called figure 8, and just like it sounds, he runs a figure 8 between your legs, right? So he runs. Let me think. If you're sitting like in a chair with your legs out, he runs under your left leg, and then in front of your left leg, and then right under your right leg and the front of your right leg, and then goes and gets the ball. So he's a nut. Right now he's not very happy because we're inside because it keeps raining. And since he's a long-haired dachshund, he tends to pick up a lot of grass. So we're a little hesitant to take him outside. And but yeah, other than that, things are good. And y'all, Friday is good. Are y'all glad that the week is over? Is the week, that's another question, like, is the week really over now that everything is online? I guess you can keep working on stuff and you have stuff to do even on the weekends. That's not necessarily a good thing. All right. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I think y'all are tired. I don't blame you. It's Friday. I'm tired too. So we'll pick this up again on Monday. Let me see who's on the sheet. Ooh, Monday is Zimmel, the Stranger. The Stranger is so good. Wait, happy birthday, Janelle. Today is your birthday? Like right now? My God, look at all this. Happy birthdays. Jeez, we're such a supportive class. Proud of y'all. What are you going to do for your birthday? See, if we're in class right now, I'd make everyone sing happy birthday to you. Begrudgingly. But they do it, right? Because they're good sports. You have yourself a good birthday, cried Janelle. There's nothing wrong with that. Yes, every day is like a Sunday. Yeah, I could see that. And Sunday, it's like, it's not a great It's like of the days to have to repeat, Sunday and Monday would probably be the worst. I would say. Right, we got other people agreeing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Look at all these happy birthdays, Janelle. You don't even know half these people. Literally, because it's both classes in here. All right. Well, it's good to hear from y'all as always. I'll see you on Monday at noon. If you have any questions for me, if I can be helpful, please let me know. I'd love to know what's going on with you, and if you need anything, if you're having any problems, or if you just want to throw around that the old mental pigskin and talk about stuff. So that's totally cool. Yeah, there is not much to do. Yeah, so I made a joke. My birthday's in April also, and I made a joke that all the good birthdays right now have been canceled because my wife was throwing me a 30th birthday party, and so we had to postpone it. And so a lot of my family has birthdays around the same time also. So anyway, not that anyone who doesn't have a birthday now isn't also good. It doesn't also have a birthday, but jokes are jokes. So yeah, this social distancing thing has really changed so many different things, and things that at least I feel like I took for granted. Being able to go to the store whenever I wanted, being able to go hang out with people whenever I wanted, and now not even being able to go outside. I mean, it's totally nuts. So yeah, y'all stay safe out there. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And this video has been over an hour, so I appreciate your patience. And I've got these what I think are really cool topics. Next week we got Zimmel the Stranger, and then we've got Reisman. Reisman is a really interesting guy, and someone who I think y'all really enjoy talking about. But if there are other things that y'all want to talk about or discuss, or different topics or a different way of going about this, I'd be happy to know. So still the same professor, still the same collaborative approach that we've had this whole time, and I just want the class to be helpful for y'all, and for y'all to get something out of it, and then also to make sure that things are okay with y'all. So I'm gonna go, because otherwise I'm gonna keep making the same speech over and over again. You could tell that not having been in the classroom for a while is wearing on me. So I imagine it's the same for some of y'all as well. So hope all of y'all are doing well. And Janelle, again, happy birthday. Hope you have a great day. And the rest of y'all have a really good weekend, and try to relax and designate an actual workstation, so that when you leave that workstation, your brain will know, okay, it's time to stop working. So things to think about. Okay. All right. See you.